and cultural customs that looked destined to break her spirit for years. She had battled, clawed, waited, hoped, begged, sacrificed, and endured every emotional storm. She had endured the incessant criticism, the hostile looks, the hushed taunts, and the never-ending charges that she didn't belong, wasn't worthy, or was just too different. However, the reality she kept choking down more and more, was that she had never been accepted into Sumit's life in the manner she so desperately wanted to feel. She loved India very much, but she never felt loved by anyone other than the man she decided to start over with. India had always been a battleground for her. After all of this, she was finally crumbling beneath the weight of it all. The days before the event that altered everything are covered in part 1. Jenny first felt the fatigue strike her like a tidal wave when the sun had just begun to rise over Nita's winding streets. She had already experienced sleepless nights, confrontations with Sumit's family, and emotionally draining chats. So, it wasn't physical fatigue. No, this was something else entirely. Something more profound, something that resided in the area where her heart once felt hopeful. Every moment of humiliation, rejection, and disappointment combined to build a weighty realization that she didn't belong here and never would. Even that simple gesture, which had once been consoling, felt too heavy to bear as she sat at the kitchen table that morning, gazing at the cup of chai that Sumit had carefully prepared for her. Tears welled up but refused to fall as she pushed the cup away, her hands shaking. She didn't want Sumi to see her break down because she didn't want to offend him by telling him the truth that she was at last prepared to do. She was aware that she couldn't continue to conceal it, though. No more. The last blow had come the previous evening. Everyone understood that Sumit's folks had come over to talk. It was just another ambush masquerading as a conversation. Another reminder that no matter how hard she tried to honor their traditions and how kind she tried to be, she would never be accepted. While Sumit's mother threw her hands in the air and yelled that Jenny had destroyed their son's life, that she was too old, and that she had brought shame to their home, she had stood quietly. Even though she had gone through it innumerable times, it felt different, as if they were deleting her rather than only hurting her. They were taking away her struggle, her value, and her dignity. Jenny also refrained from arguing this time. She didn't speak louder. She refrained from crying. She just became silent to the point where even Sumit noticed the change right away. He had made an effort to speak up and defend her, but his remarks were ignored. Nothing at all, was going to change his parents' decisions from years ago. After they left that evening, Jenny sat alone herself in the dimly lit living room as Sumit paced back and forth, attempting to console her, provide an explanation, or offer an explanation for the individuals who had destroyed her. However, she was no longer paying attention. Not because she didn't love him, but rather because she was too weak to continue fighting the same battle. For him, she had battled it. For herself, she had fought it. Because she had more faith in their love than anything else. She had resisted it. However, she had finally come to terms with the unpleasant reality that she had been denying. Love was not a panacea. Rejection could not be erased by love. Being treated like a mistake was painful, and love couldn't make it go away. A heart that had reached its breaking point was beyond the saving power of love. That night, as Sumit slept restlessly, tossed and turned, and muttered promises and apologies, Jenny sat awake in the quiet, gazing at the walls of the house they had constructed together. She mentally relived the times when she felt like she had finally found her place in the world. The wedding ceremony where she had sobbed with joy, and her initial arrival in India where she had been anxious but hopeful. The tears she had shed, the insults she had swallowed, and the loneliness she had carried in a nation where she had no family, no support system, and no one to turn to but the guy whose family wanted her gone. Now those memories. She wasn't treated fairly. He wasn't treated fairly. Jenny came to the realization that she had to make her own decisions. For the first time. Even thinking about it made her feel bad. But she had no choice to make her life in India work. She had sacrificed everything she had, including her heart, her energy, and her last remaining hope. But now all she could feel was emptiness. It is also tough to overlook emptiness when it overshadows love. When Sumit departed for work the following morning, Jenny entered their bedroom and shut the door. She gazed at her closet, the clothing she had acquired over the years, and the ensemble she wore in an attempt to fit in with a society that consistently disapproved of her. She gazed at the pictures of her Ensu on the dresser, holding hands on happy occasions, clinging to one another on sad ones, and grinning on happy ones. At this point in her life, she loved him more than she ever imagined she could love anyone. However, she couldn't continue to place her happiness at the expense of a life that was slowly killing her from the inside out. She went into the closet. Her heart broke. She inhaled deeply. She then took her suitcase out. As she set it on the bed, her hands shook furiously. She looked at it for a long time, as though she was hoping it might convince her otherwise. However, all that emerged was the oppressive quiet of a woman who had at last arrived at the end of an extremely drawn-out and agonizing journey. Slowly she unzipped the luggage, a final farewell sound reverberating throughout the room. She started folding her garments piece by piece. Every scarf, dress, and shirt held memories, some painful, some lovely, that were hard to let go of without a struggle. Nevertheless, she folded them. She brought her personal hygiene products, her travel document, her records, her cherished possessions. Once Sumit gave her a necklace, which she held for over a minute before carefully putting it inside a tiny pouch. At last, tears began to fall. Quietly at first, then wildly. As the full power of her decision reached her, she sobbed into her hands. She continued packing, though. Hours went by. The room changed from being a two-person residence to a lonely place where a woman was getting ready to vanish. After wiping away her tears and inhaling deeply, Jenny closed the suitcase. Something inside her cracked totally when the zipper sound reached the conclusion. She collapsed onto the bed and embraced the suitcase as if it were the last remnant of who she was, knowing that the anguish she was going to inflict on him would be unlike anything he had ever experienced. She repeatedly said, "I'm sorry, Sumit." However, she was also aware that remaining would further shatter her. She waited till he got home. Every moment was excruciating. She was expecting remorse, dread, and panic. But instead, she experienced an odd calm. It was a painful peace, but a peaceful one. She felt like she was making her own decisions for the first time in years, even if it meant letting go of the person she cared about the most. Sumit halted as he eventually entered the room and noticed the luggage in the center of the bedroom floor. His grin dimmed. His hand started to tremble as like he already knew what was going to happen. His eyes became hazy. "What is this?" "Exactly," he said in a crackly whisper. Jenny was unable to talk. Her eyes were crimson and puffy as she gazed up at him, watching as he was gradually crushed by understanding. At that point, when everything starts to fall apart, part one comes to a close. Sumit remained motionless in the doorway, staring at the luggage that sat in the center of the room like a quiet intruder, his breath caught in his chest. For a brief minute, he prayed that Jenny may be organizing, cleaning, preparing for a quick trip, or doing anything else other than what he was most afraid of. But every glimmer of optimism was dashed by the expression in her eyes. He had never seen such a quiet finality in her face, tear-streaked and tired. This was not a dramatic outburst during a disagreement, nor was it wrath or impatience. This was a woman's way of saying she had had enough, a lady who had decided to leave in order to save what little of herself she still had, rather than pleading to be understood. Jenny's voice was hardly audible above a whisper when she eventually spoke. The words, "Sumit, I can't stay here anymore," cut through him like a knife. In an attempt to ignore them and push them away, he reflexively shook his head. But the truth was staring him in the face of a packed bag and a lady whose soul had been beaten for too long. "No," he responded right away and moved forward. "You can't do this, Jenny. You are unable to depart." His voice broke in the middle of his statement, desperation leaking into each word. "Please don't leave." Jenny swallowed the pain in her chest and closed her eyes. She had mentally practiced this moment countless times, trying to figure out how to make him understand without hurting him, how to soften the blow. However, she was aware that it was impossible to break someone's heart, particularly one as devoted and unyielding as Sumit's. "You know I love you," she replied in a shaky voice. "However, I can't continue to live this way. I can't continue to feel unwelcome. I can't continue to argue with your relatives. I can't continue to injure myself in order to remain here. Sumit, I've run out of things." She broke down in tears as she revealed the truth she had been keeping hidden for years. "I'm empty." Sumit fell to the ground in front of her and grasped her hands as though physically clinging to her would prevent her from emotionally slipping away. In a desperate whisper, "You're not unwanted. Not by me. Not by me. You have always been my desire. I've loved you forever." I will stop at nothing to keep you here. Jenny, don't abandon me. I implore you, please. His voice wavered as he spoke, splintering where emotion took over. Jenny, however, wiped her eyes and shook her head. She whispered, it's not just about you wanting me. It has to do with how I feel about this existence. I've tried for years to be strong, to disregard your family's opinions, to endure the suffering, and to act as though I'm all right when I'm not. However, I'm worn out. Being the outsider is something I'm sick of. I'm sick of getting rejected. I don't know if I belong here. Therefore, I'm sick of sobbing myself to sleep. And whenever they attack me, a part of me vanishes. Sumit. I can no longer vanish. He received the impression that the room's air had been drawn out. Panic surged through him as his heart pounded hard against his chest. Every memory of them, including their first encounter, their laughter, their hardships, their triumphs, and the wedding they toiled so hard for, rushed through his thoughts in quick succession. He recalled the evenings he spent holding her as she sobbed following yet another rejection from his family. He recalled the future he envisioned, the pledges he made, and the promises he made. She didn't leave him in any of those fantasies. His voice tightened as he repeated, I can fix this. I'll speak with them. I'll give up trying to win them over. I will never longer force you into harmful circumstances. I'll defend you more tenaciously. I'll keep you safer. Please, just don't go. Jenny, however, moaned, her eyes growing more sorrowful. You've said that before, she remarked, honestly rather than accusingly. And perhaps you tried, perhaps you meant it. However, nothing ever shifts. Every time things improve, something goes wrong and the suffering returns. I can't continue in the same pattern. I'm being destroyed by it. And I don't want to feel this bad. When I get older, I don't want to be angry with you. I don't want to be bitter about my own existence. Sumit's face twisted as the truth of her choice hit him once more. Holding her so closely that she could not breathe, he drew her into his arms. He repeatedly whispered her name while his body trembled with tears. He poured tears down her shoulder and said, Jenny, please don't do this. Don't leave me alone. I need you. I can't live without you. This was a man losing the only person who had ever loved him without conditions. Not a man acting, controlling, or manipulating her, and it devastated her heart more profoundly than anything she had ever experienced. Jenny gave him a hug in return, holding on to him as though their shared grief could somehow build a bridge to their former existence. However, even as she held him, the realization that love was no longer sufficient pressed against her ribs. She had suffered too much throughout the years of suffering and being denied even the most basic respect. Her heart felt weak, weary, and heavy. I'm so sorry, Sumit. I'm so sorry, she whispered as she gave him a gentle kiss on the top of his head. Silently, cameras rolled in the room's corner. None of the crew had anticipated this, but they had been informed that something was going on. They had witnessed arguments. They have witnessed violent altercations. They had witnessed dramatic outbursts and weeping. However, they had never witnessed Jenny packing a bag. They had never saw her give up. They had never seen Sumit so disintegrated, so helpless, and so devastated. The gravity of the situation was sensed by everyone in the room. Unable to witness the destruction taking place in front of them, some team members even turned away. Jenny gently brushed Sumit's hair away from his face and withdrew from him. I must return home, she said. I must be with my family. I must have a sense of belonging. Sumit frantically grasped her wrist, saying, I need to breathe again. He insisted, this is your home with me. But she shook her head, saying, please, don't leave me. I no longer feel comfortable here. It's been a while since I felt that way, and I kept telling myself that things will improve. But they haven't. He scanned the room, as though seeking a solution, an answer, or anything that might prevent her from escaping. He grabbed the luggage, attempting to remove it from the bed as though concealing it might make her reconsider. But Jenny put her palm over his and gently stopped him. You can't stop this, Sumit, she replied, her voice brimming with grief. I'm not trying to harm you. I'm in pain, which is why I'm doing this. The world seemed completely still for a time. The only sound in the room was the soft erratic breathing of two people who were on opposing sides of an impossible reality, but were devoted to one another. Then suddenly, Sumit fell to the ground, slapping his hands over his face and sobbing furiously. His sobs were painful and raw as they reverberated against the walls. As he collapsed, Jenny knelt next to him and held him. She was suddenly struck by the unconscionable truth of what she was doing. Choosing herself would entail destroying the heart of the guy she had battled so hard to be with, but there was nothing she could do. They sat there in quiet and heartbreak for hours that seemed like minutes. The room was eventually covered with deep shadows as the sun sank outside the window. Jenny got up and wiped her eyes. Sumit's eyes were puffy and red as he gazed up at her, the unspoken query begging for a different response. When, he muttered. Jen paused before responding. Tomorrow, she murmured quietly. And Sumit's face fell apart once more as soon as she said the word. The night before Jenny's departure seemed to go on for her, with a thick, oppressive quiet engulfing the apartment's walls that had once been filled with debates, laughter, makeup, and hope. Like a dying candle fighting a chilly breeze, that hope was now dwindling. Long after Jenny had fled into the living room, Sumit sat on the edge of the bed, each of them ensnared in their own grief, struggling to endure the indescribable knowledge that tomorrow would shatter their lives. Sumit felt a crushing weight compress his chest, making it difficult to breathe every time he attempted to glance at the suitcase. He repeated her name to the empty room in the darkness, as if repeating it would keep her by his side. Even in the adjacent room, though, her absence felt like an open wound that would not go away. Curled up on the couch, Jenny held onto a cushion as if it were her lifeline. Hours of crying had left her eyelids puffy, but the heavy silent tears continued. She had centered her life in India during the past years on a single person, a love that had seen her through some of the most trying times in her life. She could feel the fragments of her heart ripping from her chest as she got ready to go. She also experienced a horrible realization that this was the only way to save herself, along with a peculiar clarity. She could no longer wake up every morning worrying if she would be rejected once more. She couldn't continue to be dragged into the emotional turmoil of a family that thought she was a mistake. She could no longer continue to give up her tranquility for a love that demanded more strength than she possessed. She heard footsteps softly approaching the living area at around midnight. She hastily wiped her face in an attempt to gather her thoughts. But as soon as Sumit showed in, she could see the destruction written all over him. Somehow he appeared smaller, as if suffering had made him smaller. His eyes were sunken and crimson, and his shoulders drooped. Without a word, he took a seat beside her, and for a while they just gazed at the ground, neither of them knowing how to begin the conversation they both desired. At last, his voice was hardly heard. "Can we just have a conversation one final time?" Jenny nodded, but her throat was too constricted to respond. In an attempt to regain his composure, Sumit inhaled deeply. "Why didn't you inform me earlier?" Quietly, he inquired. "What kept you waiting till now when everything is already over?" Jenny's heart contorted. "Because I tried," she muttered. "I put a lot of effort into making it function. I kept convincing myself that I was capable of overcoming all the pressure, rejection, and suffering. I was unwilling to abandon us. I didn't want to cause you any harm." Her voice shook. "I didn't want to be the one who left. But every time I was attacked by your family, every time I sobbed by myself, every time I felt inadequate, I felt like I was losing parts of who I was. I can't continue doing it. I simply can't." Tears welled up in Sumit's eyes once more, but she also felt guilty. Heavy, oppressive guilt. "I ought to have done more to protect you," he continued. "I ought to have resisted them more forcefully. I ought to have fulfilled my commitments. I believed that you were capable of handling it. I was unaware of the extent of the harm it was causing you. I failed to notice it. Or perhaps I was unwilling to notice it." Jenny touched his hand tenderly. Softly, she said, "I know you tried. I am aware that you loved me in your own unique way, and you'll never know how much I loved you. However, love shouldn't cause this kind of pain. It shouldn't feel like a war every single day." For the last time, they sat in silence and held hands like delicate threads connecting their hearts. The city was silent, nearly dead silent. Outside, it seemed as though the darkness was holding its breath for them. With his body shaking, Sumit rested his head on Jenny's shoulder. "What should I do once you're gone?" he muttered. "Whatever happens to me?" Jenny tightly clenched her eyes, attempting to prevent a full-blown breakdown. She muttered, You'll be fine. But she wasn't sure if she believed it. You underestimate your strength, and without me around, perhaps you'll manage to reconcile with your family. Perhaps they will no longer center you. Perhaps you'll be able to live your life without always defending your decisions. However, Sumit furiously shook his head. Without you, I do not desire tranquility. A life without you is not what I desire. For you, I battled everyone. For you, I defied everything. And now that you're going, I'm losing everything. Jenny choked back the sob that rose in her throat. You're not going to lose everything, she said in a sad whisper. You're not losing your life, but you're losing me. You will reconstruct. You'll figure it out. You'll regain your ability to live. Sumit, however, didn't think she was real. He was unable to. Jenny was more than just his wife to him. She was his refuge, his solace, and the only person who truly loved him unconditionally. Losing her meant losing the only person who genuinely understood him. It was intolerable to consider waking up without her at his side. The hours went so slowly as they held each other close, exchanged memories, and talked through their emotions, knowing that they would soon have to let go. Jenny's heart fell when the room was softly illuminated by the first rays of dawn peeking through the curtains. It was time in the morning. It had finally happened, the moment she had been dreading, the one that would alter everything. Silently, she got up and went to retrieve her suitcase from the bedroom. The weight of each step increased. Sumit trailed behind her, dragging his feet as if he were on his way to be put to death. With trembling breath, Sumit carefully grasped her arm as she moved the luggage off the bed. May I accompany you to the airport with a quivering voice? He inquired. Jenny hesitated, feeling as though she would be crushed by the emotional burden. She didn't want to exacerbate his situation. However, she was also aware that it would be cruel to deny him that final opportunity. Slowly, she nodded. Yes, she said in a whisper. They were almost silent as they rode to the airport. Every mile brought them closer to the moment they feared, and every bump in the road made their hearts tighten. The car seemed like a casket of memories. Sumit wiped away the tears that continued to fall as she gazed out the window. Jenny silently observed him, knowing that she couldn't ease his suffering without destroying herself. The air felt sharper and colder as they got to the airport, as though reality was telling them that their time was running out. As they entered, Sumit grasped her hand and squeezed it firmly, unaware of the silent tragedy taking place between two people, clinging to each other for the final time. People rushed around them, chatting, laughing, and going about their daily lives. Jenny's hands trembled as she gave her passport to the check-in agent. Like a countdown clock, the sound of the airline employee printing her boarding card reverberated in her ears. Unable to control his tears, Sumit stood behind her and kept wiping his eyes. The moment grew intolerable when they reached the security line. It was this. This was the last farewell. Jenny looked him in the face. Sumit's face was shaking with anguish, crimson, and saturated with tears. His voice broke as he spoke, cupping her face in his palms. He muttered, "Please don't go. Please, I'm pleading with you. Don't leave me alone. Please don't abandon me." Jenny's voice broke. "I'll vanish if I stay," she said. "I cherish you. I shall cherish you forever. However, I must protect myself." Sobbing uncontrollably, they fell into one other's arms. Both of them were unconcerned as others began to observe them. For them, the world was ending, so they clung to one another as if it were. At last, the security guard motioned for Jenny to move forward. Slowly, she withdrew, her heart aching more with each inch of separation. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face as Sumit reached out for her once more. She muttered, "Goodbye, Sumit." She turned away and his knees gave way. With foggy eyes and erratic breathing, Jenny made her way to the security checkpoint. Her heart felt like it was being torn out of her chest with each step. When she finally turned around after arriving at the line, she found Sumit standing there, sobbing uncontrollably with his hand to his heart. After that, she vanished through the gate. As the environment around him changed, Sumit collapsed to the ground and began to cry. Jenny never turned around. One of the most memorable, poignant, and tragic relationships in Fiancé history, that of Jenny and Sumit, had come to a terrible end.